From the KUAM Podcast Network, this is Rlene Live, with conversation on island issues facing Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands. Now, here's Rlene.
So today's the 12th of March 2019, and this interview is with Martin Kastner. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I've always been kind of fascinated by nature and by wildlife, and I kind of followed that passion into university, into college life, and studied biology as my undergraduate degree, and then wasn't quite sure where I wanted to go with it and took a little time off just traveling and volunteering after that, and ended up deciding that restoration ecology was a field I wanted to go into, something positive, kind of proactive, constructive, and something that I could really kind of feel passionate about and work in passionately. And I did a master's degree in restoration ecology, working on kind of landscape level restoration, mostly with plants, and ended up figuring out that really kind of the whole picture, full ecosystem restoration, and especially when it involved the recovery of wildlife species, was my real passion. And following my master's, did a diploma internship in endangered species recovery, and a kind of full ecosystem perspective on endangered species recovery, so involving the habitat, involving wildlife, and the kind of ecosystem services that they provide. And most of that work was on the island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, which has a lot of kind of parallels ecologically with Guam. And my first job after that experience was in Guam, working with the Sali, and it's kind of continued since then. I've been on Guam since 2015, and work.
You love it.
Yeah, I do love it, and yeah, it's still a lot of work to be done.
Where is that island located?
In the Indian Ocean, on so east of Madagascar, maybe a few hundred kilometers east of Madagascar.
You said it has the same ecological similarity?
So some of the similarities are in terms of the role of invasive species. So, I mean, famously, Mauritius was the home of the dodo bird, which was one of the first species, if not the first species, that humans realized went extinct because of them. And so they've lost probably more than half of their native bird species due to the combined effects of habitat loss and invasive species, and as have a lot of islands worldwide. But yeah, a lot of parallels. They do have an invasive snake as well, and so just a lot of parallels with Guam, and so kind of a lot of transferable issues.
How did you associate these islands and their ecologies and their similarities with endangered species? Did you just discover this one day? Were you looking for some kind of a comparison?
I've heard about Guam since my undergraduate degree, just kind of basic classes on conservation biology. It's a bit of a textbook, worst case scenario, kind of in the kind of severity of the impact of the brown tree snake. And so, you know, that's kind of the level that I heard about Guam. And also when I was on Mauritius, you know, it came up as well. A few people who were teaching the course there had been to Guam. You know, quite honestly, it's a bit of a coincidence. I was looking for jobs, you know, once I was done my internship there, saw something, you know, on Guam that looked appealing. It was avian restoration, and that's kind of as deep as the connection went. So I was looking to kind of get my foot in the door in endangered species recovery, in, you know, not necessarily birds even. I'm really interested in kind of the recovery of wildlife in general and ecosystems in general. And so, I found a job that looked interesting, and that was kind of what brought me to Guam. And, since then, I've really kind of understood the deeper connections. And I think even at the time when I first found the job, it really seemed like, okay, this is, kind of as big a challenge in terms of ecological restoration as there is. And so, why not? Why not jump in the deep end?
What job was this?
So it was working on developing a nest box for the Sali. So the project, this was a new project, and I had worked on a little bit of nest box work in Mauritius. They use nest boxes for a native species of parrot and a native species of kestrel, which is a small falcon. And so had, some idea of kind of where to get started. And so I went out and surveyed Sali nests, the ones that are in kind of different structures and trees on Anderson, and then went about kind of with Dr. Julie Savage and her husband, Dr. Tom Seibert, going about thinking of different prototypes and what we could try and test and eventually work towards something that would work for the Sali.
How did you get in contact with Julie?
She was my supervisor.
Oh, pretty neat lady, huh?
Yeah. Very neat lady.
Yeah. So let's go back a little bit. I'm really curious about this. You decide today that you're going to go out and you're going to look for nests.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any background knowledge before you go out where nests may be?
Step one is kind of where are they? And then, it's just a matter of kind of being attentive, listening, so observing, walking, and just kind of paying attention to what's going on. And then, if you see a bird perched near, something that looks like a nesting cavity, then just look if it's going in and out. You could sometimes see a little bit of nesting material coming out of the entrance. So it's that simple. I think I was finding probably 10 or 15 a day. They're out there. I'd say that it's just kind of a matter of being in the right location. You can, when we're doing surveys of the Sali in general, the population is quite concentrated, and then as soon as you get to kind of the limits of their range in that area, it really thins out, and so it would take a long time. There are Sali all across at least the north of the island, but how much they're nesting, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find a nest in most places, on a given day, but where they're kind of concentrated, it's actually pretty easy. So Sali are willing to nest, as I mentioned earlier, in kind of just about anything, but in natural situations, they often nest in the tops of coconut trees and also in coconut snags, which is basically the standing trunk where the crown has fallen off, and they'll nest in the top of that. And you do see that on other islands, and there are records of that in Guam historically. They also nest in the tops of telephone poles, which look a lot like coconut snags.
You said that project had already been in place, and that's what you came to do, right?
Sure. I got hired on as the sort of field technician, and there was a postdoc, Dr. Shane Sires, who was in charge of the project. He ended up taking a job at USDA and WRC in Hilo, maybe a couple of weeks after I started, and so we never actually overlapped. So I sort of inherited the project in a way as kind of the staff on Guam with Dr. Savage and Dr. Seibert as the PIs in Colorado. And so I was doing the field work and kind of, helping as much as possible, kind of work through the kinks of the project, all the kind of different elements of the work we were doing on Guam.
For those who are listening and don't have any idea what field work is, describe field work in this project.
It started off with going out and looking for any nests we could find, and characterizing them, which means noting what type of structure they were in, how high, what direction they're facing, what vegetation is nearby, all the kind of little details about where the birds were nesting, and if there was anything in that, the size of the entrance hole, that kind of thing, that would kind of inform our decisions when we were thinking about the nest box. Ends up they are kind of willing to nest in just about anything. There is some nesting in an old kind of ornamental fighter jet that they have on Anderson, in coconut trees and coconut snags, so dead trees where the crown has fallen off, and nesting in the top, in buildings and lampposts. But that's interesting information, and so went out and documented nests, also monitored the nests, so looked inside with a camera and a monitor to see how many eggs they were laying, how long the eggs took to hatch, how long the chicks took to fledge, and how often they were nesting, all that type of data. So that was the first kind of stage, looking at the natural nests, then building the nest boxes, which isn't field work per se, but it's kind of hands-on, testing different prototypes to see how they perform in the field. Specifically, we're looking at kind of how the materials, since we knew we'd need to install them somewhere exposed so the snakes couldn't get to them, we wanted something that wouldn't heat up, so we were monitoring the internal temperatures of the boxes and settled on kind of variation on the same prototype, so a wood box and a cedar box that look more or less similar, but we wanted to give the birds a little bit of choice in what we were offering them to see if they had a preference for one material or another. Installing the boxes, then monitoring as the birds adopted the boxes, and keeping track of how successful the birds were at breeding in the boxes. So all that type of field work.
This is Rlene Live, and we've got more coming up in just a moment.
Start your day the KUAM way with our new streaming shows on Facebook Live each weekday. Here's your starting lineup. Mondays will give you a glimpse into our morning meetings with the KUAM news team. Tuesdays, join our group chat with Chris Barnett. Wednesdays, it's crime time with the island's law enforcers. Thursdays, get the latest info with Dave Delgado, who's in the zone. And Fridays, we get Fit AF, fitness and fun. And the best part, all our shows are completely interactive, so you're directly part of the conversation. Join us Monday through Friday starting at 9 a.m. Start your day the KUAM way.
Now, more Rlene Live on the KUAM Podcast Network.
So did the birds have a preference?
Not really, no. They're quite happy to nest in whatever we're offering them, but the boxes work well in that they're protected from the elements. So we did see kind of really high nesting success in the boxes. So first because we put them in places and made sure we put them in places that predators can get into, and second of all, they're sheltered from the elements. They're kind of lower than ambient temperatures, well ventilated, and so for those reasons the birds are quite successful in them. But it started off with kind of some indication that they might prefer the wooden boxes, and then really quickly they kind of ended up using both the wooden and the PVC boxes equally with no kind of obvious preference, and kind of pretty equivalent success in both. So yeah.
Does one get hotter in the daytime internally than the other? The PVC
the
versus
wood boxes get kind of a little bit warmer, but not to a point where it's even necessarily statistically significant. So yeah, essentially equivalent, I would say.
That's interesting.
But
PVC
the nice thing
homes.
about the PVC boxes is that they're durable. They've been up there for over 3 years, and there's no kind of indication of wear and tear, so that's a plus.
And in the wood?
They're all fine as well. They're holding up really well, but you could tell that they're weathering, some small cracks and that kind of thing. But they're all still up there. Nothing, even despite the small storms we've had, no damage at all. So yeah. So it just so happens that a population hung on Anderson, and that's recorded kind of throughout the years. And so it could be that there are large expanses of lawn, a lot of kind of space between the runways, which may have prevented the snakes from getting to those birds. And so there may have been a few stragglers in the 80s, 90s, when the rest of the bird species disappeared. And as the snake control ramped up, then the population has been able to recover somewhat. And so it's kind of a combination of the impact of the snake control and the historical kind of just remnant population in the last kind of most northern area of Guam, the last area where the snake invasion occurred.
That's a very interesting point for me, because my understanding of the impact that the brown tree snake had on wildlife on Guam is that they were accidentally introduced on Navy ships down at the port.
I think that's
Sumai,
kind of
right?
the
Yeah.
common
Right.
understanding. Yeah.
Okay, and then it spread south. And
Sure.
so the native birds in the south started to disappear.
Mhm.
But the Sali make their way to Cocos Island.
I don't think there's any indication that they ever were not on Cocos Island. So I
Okay.
think that population was likely there and just remained there because the snake never crossed to Cocos Island. But I don't think there's any indication, as I understand it, that a sort of exodus to Cocos Island occurred. But the population has kind of persisted on Cocos Island.
Okay.
And they do, on other islands, they're known to hang around seabird colonies, and they're known to depredate seabird eggs. And so even in the kind of northern islands, you have Sali on every northern island, and, they've been recorded eating seabird eggs and kind of existing in those areas.
Northern islands from Luta, Tinian, and Saipan.
Yeah, and
anything
further,
north?
yeah.
Oh,
I think they're on all the islands in the Marianas,
Oh,
as far as
okay.
I understand.
That's good to know.
Sure. I mean, I'm relatively new to the system, but I've read a lot about Sali, and so as far as I know, that's correct. There's a lot of literature, from and oral history as far back as the 1800s, 1900s about birds on Guam, and yeah, I mean, as far as I know, Sali have been on Cocos, recorded on Cocos from well before the snake was ever introduced to Guam. So yeah.
You mentioned that the Sali are crevice dwellers.
Mm-hmm.
Describe what that is, please.
Sure. In terms of bird nests in general, there's kind of two main types. A cup nester, so the kind of typical stick, twig, kind of open cup that you would see just on a branch, and then a cavity nester, so something that would nest in a hole, either that they excavate themselves, kind of like a woodpecker, you could see kind of chipping away, and then they would, nest in some kind of tree cavity, or a branch that fell off and leaves a cavity in a tree that a bird can nest in. And birds that use nest boxes are generally cavity nesters. And there's a whole range from sparrows, that kind of thing, the little Eurasian tree sparrows on Guam that nest behind shutters, that would count as a cavity nester, to swallows, martins, elsewhere, to owls, and birds of prey. And the kingfisher, the seahawk, also a cavity nester. They're one that excavate their own cavities, so they'll find a relatively soft trunk, of a coconut tree or some other tree and chip away until they kind of dig out their own cavity. Sali are cavity nesters, but they don't actually excavate their own cavity. They find a cavity, either an old CHEC cavity or just an area on a tree where a branch fell off and rotted away into a cavity. Or on other islands, you often see them nesting in holes in the limestone cliffs or around the entrance of caves. They'll place a little nesting material. They usually use, at least on Guam, the kind of what looks like needles on the ironwood trees, the Kastner needles, and then some pieces of coconut leaflets. So they'll strip away small pieces of coconut leaves and then create a cup inside the cavity and lay their eggs there.
What is the color of the Sali's egg?
The Sali eggs are kind of light blue or light blue, greenish almost, and then they're reddish, brownish splotches over sometimes the entire egg, sometimes just one of the sort of sides of it. But yeah, so bluish, greenish with kind of reddish brown spots on it or splotches.
How many eggs do they lay in a clutch?
2 to 3.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Pretty small.
Pretty small, yeah.
What is the incubation period of the eggs?
So they'll incubate for 15 days,
How far apart do they lay them?
usually consecutive days.
So one a day.
Yep.
So in 3 days, the nest is full.
Yep.
And then 15 days from the first or from the last?
Yeah, they normally also hatch on consecutive days. There's a little bit of variation, so some might hatch in 14 days, some might hatch in 16 days. I only normally check nests a few times a week, so I don't always see them hatching on consecutive days, but I did follow a subset of nests daily just to kind of hone in on those numbers. And yeah, so they'll usually lay on consecutive days and hatch on consecutive days. Sometimes they'll hatch together, so maybe there's some kind of stimulus and they start to hatch and then the siblings decide they want to hatch as well. But 25 days from hatching to fledgling, so from the day they leave the egg to the day they fly out of the nest.
And only
They're quite
three,
pretty.
And only 3 a clutch.
Yeah, so normally, I mean, we've seen as few as 1, and the absolute record was 4. We've only seen that once in about 300 nests.
That's a lot of nests.
Yeah.
That's very good news.
Yeah, no, so they nest, so not, as you said, not too many eggs per clutch, but they do nest quite often.
Do the parents share responsibility in feeding the brood?
They do, yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
Okay, so they systematically go off and on. Does one always stay around?
Almost always, yeah. I mean, sometimes they'll
by?
be they'll be nearby. Usually kind of take turns. So incubating, which is sitting on the eggs, and the young chicks, and then feeding as well. Both parents kind of play a role. It seems like the females, the moms, are usually the ones incubating at night. But otherwise it's, pretty shared parental duties.
Don't go away. There's more coming up with Rlene Live on the KUAM Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, and what is going on? Jason Salas here with KUM Digital, and I'm going to get you right back to your show in just a moment, but I am popping in to let you know about the amazing opportunities you have to sell your brand, get customers for your service, or promote your event on all our library of podcasts on the KUM Podcast Network. Our shows have global distribution and are sent to all the major podcast directories and devices, from mobile phones and tablets to laptops and smart speakers to integrated TVs, and all on demand. By running an audio ad on the KUM Podcast Network, you'll guarantee timely exposure and market penetration for your stuff and see immediate results no matter what your end game or actionable items are. You want to drive downloads for a cool new app that you've built? Done. Want to see your restaurant gain an instant surge in foot traffic? Easy peasy, man. Does your business need some sort of boost? All you got to do is plug a promo code that ties into an incentive and see measurable, tangible results that very same day. Podcasting is the internet's fastest growing ad platform, and you can reach customers and partners now. To find out more about our ad opportunities and how podcast plugs can work for you, get in touch with us at podcasts@kuam.com. Just think about it. Your ad could be running right here instead of my shrill voice, and your business would have a big leg up on the competition. So don't let this opportunity to connect with customers, extend your reach, and increase your effective exposure pass you by. Get in touch with the KUAM digital marketing experts by emailing podcasts@kuam.com. That's podcasts, plural, at kuam.com. And let us put together an effective marketing plan for your stuff, just like this ad has been. See what I did there? All right, everybody, we're going to talk to you soon, but for now, let's get you back to this podcast.
Now, back to the conversation with Rlene Live.
When you said earlier that the sali predates other eggs, do they eat all seabird eggs?
On Guam, so, on Cocos, there's the white terns, black noddies, brown noddies, and on Anderson, there's white terns and brown noddies. And I've definitely found eggs of both of those, of white terns and of brown noddies, that look like they've been predated, and I've seen sali around a brown noddy nest kind of harassing the birds and with a broken egg below. So I think that it's possible that they could predate the eggs of all those species that are at least nesting on Guam and on Cocos Island, but I'm not sure about the boobies on Rhoda, that kind of thing.
Oh goodness, what do they eat?
So a lot of fruits. So they eat, it seems like almost the majority of native kind of trees and shrubs and vines in the limestone forest, and then some of the plants that are in the savanna as well. So their favorite, and I apologize for the Latin names, but Premna, ficus, which is figs, nunu, and the different species of figs, papaya, some of the vines, so jasminum, but really, an incredible diversity of fruits. So they love lemai and duk-duk. They'll even eat coconut. We've seen them eat coconut kind of off the ground once it was broken up. And then, so maybe I think we've probably recorded over 30 species of plants, of fruits that they eat. And then a lot of insects. So you see them bringing in kind of katydids, grasshoppers, and, they'll go after kind of maybe ant eggs or termite eggs and rotten logs, that kind of thing. A lot of spiders. The spiders are one of the things you see them bringing back to the nest most often. Geckos, I've seen them carrying geckos and probably skinks as well.
Butterfly?
Never seen them eating butterflies, no. It's possible, but yeah, it seems like the drongos really kind of go after the butterflies the most. Yeah, I don't know if they're quite agile enough to catch a butterfly. It actually seems
that's probably
quite
true.
Difficult, yeah.
Yeah, the agility with their forked tail, the sali doesn't have a long tail.
No, it's a nice tail, nice longish, but yeah, not even close to the drongo.
Right. I've seen the drongo attack, or at least swoop down very closely on the sali, and they're not at all bothered by them.
No. If anything, they give as much as they take. You can see them chasing drongos away from kind of around the nests.
So they are territorial.
Yeah, they are territorial.
Do they? You said they predate on the eggs. Do they go after the hatchlings?
I am not sure. I think if it's happened, it's probably recorded somewhere. So see kind of in Doug's book, Birds of Palau, you can see them, and they discuss kind of how they go into nests. So it's possible they eat nestlings, like the aga do, and even kingfishers. But offhand, I couldn't say if they would eat nestlings or not. I can't see why they wouldn't. I mean, they eat geckos there, right? Yeah. So especially maybe a small...
right after hatching.
Yeah. On Guam, there's not too many nestlings that they would be able to go after.
What about each other? Do they predate on another?
I've never really seen that. I mean, we've seen, a few kind of aggressive interactions, but I think if that did happen, I think there's a good chance we would have seen that by now. I mean, we've monitored hundreds of nests, and never seen that. I think once the eggs hatch, they almost always make it and almost always fledge. And
so then the
when they
rate's
don't,
high.
It is extremely high up to the point they leave the nest. Once they fledge, it's actually extremely low. We've recorded, just overwhelming predation on young fledglings.
By whom?
By mostly snakes. And despite the, snake control, there's still snakes there, and the ones that are there. So in 2018, we had about 5% fledgling survival, and in 2017, it was a little higher, around 25%, but both those numbers are extremely low.
So then the snake predation got worse in 1 year, from 17 to 18.
I mean, it was worse. It's hard to know kind of what the baseline variation is, or if it did just legitimately get worse. But I mean, both numbers are very low. And so, I think that, it's quite obvious that the fledglings are extremely vulnerable. Some cat predation as well. Some kind of natural causes of mortality just in bad storms. But the majority was brown tree snakes.
How many times in an hour do hatchlings have to be fed?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, as often, depending on the bird, as often as every 15 or 20 minutes. But I would say with the Sali, I think it depends how old they are. And we don't have kind of like great numbers for nests over a long period of time. That's not something we've done as part of our research, but we've watched a lot of nests, and at least you could see them once or twice an hour at least feeding nestlings. And you would assume, and it would be interesting for a student at some point in undergrad to go and just watch nests at different ages and see if it's possible the youngest chicks get fed most often, like in other species. And then as they get older, they would need to be fed less often. I mean, I think birds in general, that's kind of seems to be the trend.
So they feed the youngest first to strengthen them, and then they
then they can
pull back.
Yeah, so I mean, there could be a few reasons. I mean, the young are naked, they don't have insulation, so their metabolism might be a little higher, and they might just be growing at a faster rate. But it does seem like, and when people are hand rearing birds as well, tend to hand rear, feed at least every hour or so once the birds are young, very young, and then you kind of can pull back a little bit as the birds get older. Again, their range on Guam, which is where I've done all my work, is pretty restricted. So it's housing, it's dorms, it's commercial buildings, but it seems within that they're pretty open to any kind of scenario, closer to the forest, further from the forest, open fields, a little bit more vegetation, but there's not a really wide range of kind of habitats in there. So I mean, it would take someone studying them, maybe on a different island to really kind of get at whether they have a preference. I mean, I know that they definitely nest in kind of different habitats. You see them on Cocos Island, you see them in the forest on Saipan, along the cliff edges near the sea, on Rhoda, by the Seabird Sanctuary, in the savannah, just about anywhere. So, I mean, if there is a preference, it'll be kind of subtle.
Okay.
Stay where you are. The conversation continues with Rlene Live when we come back.
What's up, fellow online addicts? I'm Asha, and it's literally my job to scour the internet every day to see what you guys are saying about our stories and to see what you're snarking on. If you got beef with a particular island issue, we'll give your voice an extra boost on Trend Spotting. It's our weekly rundown of everything that's got you buzzing and what conversations you can't look away from. From the serious to the silly, from ludicrous news to legit headlines, from the weirdest Instagram posts to the most retweeted stories to the insane DMs we get, we're going to show you the deeper side of what's making group chats, what's trending, and what you're sharing. So check out Trend Spotting on YouTube, on Facebook Live, and on IGTV, all at KUAM News. If you've got something to say, sound off. We'll find you. And now, back to your show right here on the KUAM Podcast Network.
Now, back to the conversation with Rlene Live.
What would you like to say to listeners in relationship to maybe not just the birds, but their awareness of their environment, their ecology, how they could be better stewards?
Yeah, I think that, just as kind of I have an innate passion for wildlife, I think that's something that is not uncommon, and it's actually, present in a lot of young people especially. And I think, people in general do get really amazed when they see animals around them. And I think, it's unfortunate that on Guam, that kind of relationship has been lost with a lot of the species that just aren't around anymore. And, also as kind of the society is more urbanized, and that's common not just to Guam, but to almost anywhere. But, I think as much as possible, rekindling a relationship with nature is crucial, and I think it's enjoyable. It's not really an effort. It's more kind of a habit and something that can be quite fulfilling. And so, I think as biologists, we're lucky because we're out there, and we're spending time in nature every day as part of our jobs, but we aren't the ones with the most power to make decisions in terms of protecting lands, in terms of what happens to natural lands on Guam that are still being lost at a rapid pace. I think, there are a lot of environmental issues in terms of erosion, in terms of fishing. And so just as much as possible, not to let those decisions go to a handful of people, but to be engaged in kind of decisions that go around kind of stewardship, I think is crucial. And so, I think as part of, someone's kind of civic duty, I think being aware and being engaged in nature is quite crucial to me.
Well, thank you very much. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I will.
and look forward to some partnership work here.
Yeah, me too. Well, it's, it's starting.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, me too.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Rlene Live on the KUAM Podcast Network. Join her every Monday for a new edition. Log on soundcloud.com/KUAM News or listen anytime. Scroll down and click on Rlene. We welcome your feedback and suggestions. Email Rlene RLENE, at arlenelive.com. Thanks for listening.